Traditional etiquette says that politics, religion, and money should never be brought up in polite company. And we're here to discuss all three. I'm Debbie Hancock, a conservative and a Christian living in the Deep South.
I'm Arielle Goren, a born and raised New Yorker and a liberal Jew. We're asking the hard questions and actually listening to what the other has to say.
Is Anybody Listening podcast starts now. We just had to start off with that because we feel like it's what our country needs to hear.
I think everybody could use some anti-anxieties right now.
Yeah,
Everyone.
things just seem out of control right now. So that's why we're here, right?
And that's why we're here, Deb.
I don't know. I might need a Xanax to do this show.
I might need a beta blocker.
So as our intro says, I'm Debbie Hancock. I'm not a big podcast listener. They kind of drive me crazy with the banter. We're not off to a good start, to be honest. But I thought normally we'll get right into things, but we wanted to do a little intro because let's be honest, nobody knows who we are. So Arielle, why don't you start and just kind of tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, what you've done, and go from there.
Yeah. Hi, world. I am Arielle. I'm from New York. I grew up in the Northeast. I went to school in the Northeast. I lived on both coasts and worked in politics for a long time. And really, I think the more interesting story is the one that you and I kind of want to share with everyone, Debbie, which is that we met working together. We come from very different parts of the country, very different cultural backgrounds, very different upbringings, and yet we've sort of forged this friendship that is really rooted in the fact that despite those big cultural differences and, as our bios say, kind of set us up to be polar opposites, we find that we agree on so much more than anyone would give us credit for. And our hope is that not just that agreement, but also that maybe our constructive disagreement can perhaps be, I don't want to be so presumptuous as to say a model for some people during these difficult times, but really that this podcast, the idea for this podcast was sort of born out of a lot of very authentic conversations and text threads that we would have and discussions where we would say to one another like, hey, what is going on here? Can you explain this to me? Why do conservatives think this way? Why do liberals or progressives think this way? And can you share a little bit about why we might be in this place that we're in right now, where people are so polarized?
Yeah, for sure. As you said, I'm from the South. I'm originally from Texas. Went to school there, moved to DC after school. I worked on the Hill for, as one of my former colleagues pointed out, the three most conservative members of Congress. And that's really how I think we got introduced. My side of the story, I'm curious what the setup was on your side, but it was my first day on the job at Uber. It's 2014. It's the Wild West. And I'm flown to San Francisco to get to know the other policy and communications staffers because I was based in Texas. And I'm just sitting at my desk, minding my own business. And up comes a girl and she's like, I heard that you worked for Michelle Bachmann and I worked for Chuck Schumer. And I was like, ooh, because from my experience working on the Hill, anytime I would tell people who I worked for, there was always like a reaction of, oh, they're so conservative or this. And I'm like, who cares? So I was just conditioned to kind of be on my heels. But then we went to lunch, and I think at the old age of 28, we were some of the oldest people there. And
That's
we were
startup
like,
life.
oh, yeah, we're both married. Let's go have lunch. And we hit it off. But I want to know from your perspective, what did they tell you?
Tell me. I mean, it was Uber in 2014, like next to nothing. I don't know. I don't know how much they told me. I mean, I definitely knew that you had worked for Congresswoman Bachmann, I guess. And I don't remember saying that to you, but that's very funny. And that does sound like me, to just kind of lay it all out there. But, I think we also, in some ways, we're not that old, but we also kind of come from this time and place where when we worked on the Hill, people could be friends with folks on the other side. It was not abnormal, right? To go
Yeah.
out to drinks after work
Yeah.
together. I had friends who, particularly when I was on the committee side, who worked for some of the most conservative senators,
Mhm.
for Senator Shelby, for Senator Cornyn, and we had discussions about things. We had banter. We had fun. Dare I say, we had fun together. So it feels in so many ways like a million years ago.
So we worked at Uber together, and honestly, I would say, I mean, we were professional together and we would work on stuff, but it wasn't until both of us left Uber, and it probably isn't a coincidence that it was around the time of the 2016 election that we really started to engage in conversation. I remember standing outside. We worked where I was working at the time in downtown Dallas, and you called me, and it was one of your let me ask you a question. What do you think about this conversations? And I think that's where it really took off. And ever since then, you were the one that kept saying, we should have a podcast. And I'm like, who would listen to that? Yeah, come out. Hence the name, is anybody listening? But I am curious why you thought we should do this. What exactly got in your crazy head that we should have a podcast?
You know, and it is a crazy head, by the way. But I think that I've been really lucky to always have friends who think differently than I do, right? Obviously,
Mhm.
everybody's got sort of their hive mind. And I think increasingly over the past 5, 10, 15 years, as we've seen our politics become so polarized, there's so much talk about the echo chambers that we all live in. And that is very true. I think you and I are both fundamentally very curious people.
Mm.
And it's something that we use to our advantage. And we're not just curious, but we sort of have this ability to kind of both detach a little bit
Mhm.
emotionally,
Exactly.
even in very
Yeah.
emotionally charged conversations and environments, but also at the same time humanize. Right? We
Yeah.
we don't lose touch of the fact that when we're talking about policy, that we're also talking about real people and real lives and how
Exactly.
important that is.
Yeah. I have always preferred a staffer role. That's why I was a press secretary. I prefer writing. I often relate to George Bush. I get that word salad. I have a hard time verbalizing what is going on in my head. I like to think it's because maybe my brain is moving faster than my mouth.
It's a few
Um,
steps ahead.
yeah, but, I kept putting you off and saying, "Oh," well, first I just said no for probably 8 years, and then for about a year, I said, "Maybe, you know, I need to wait until my kids are in school full time," but you wrote
Yeah,
on
I
your
I think you were like, "Unless we want a 3rd co-host, we need to
Yeah.
wait until their little one's in
Exactly, and no
school."
guarantees that the dog and cat won't be joining the show. You wrote on the New Year's card that you sent me 2025, the year we start a podcast, and I love a good challenge and a goal, and that was hanging up on my wall for several months, and, we had our first actual meeting to sit down and cut out what this looks like on Tuesday, September 8th, and then the next day, Charlie Kirk was we had already decided we were going to do this. Obviously, we had our meeting the day before, but I think that was the final confirmation that we needed. And I think a recent poll that just came out, that was, I think, somewhere of 80% of people believe that the political discourse is contributing to the political violence. I I hate that it happened. It is horrific for Charlie and his family. It's horrific for our nation, and I hope that something good can come out of this the last few days, to just see how people on opposite sides of the aisle are discussing this and giving grace to one another. And it's not everybody. I've also been wanting to pull my hair out when I turn on cable news and I hear both sides pointing to the other side, like we aren't learning anything.
Right.
But I mean, Erica Kirk's speech where she is saying, "I forgive the man who murdered my husband," and honestly, hearing Jimmy Kimmel talk about that and tear up about that and how that
Yeah.
impacted him. Those are 2 people that see things very differently, but when you bring that human aspect into it and when you show grace and mercy, it's just amazing, I think, how the conversation, can turn. And so, like you, I'm not so bold to believe that this will move the needle in any large scale, but at some point, we have to take personal responsibility for how we are contributing to the toxicity and vitriol in this country, and I think it's a lot like voting. You know, your one vote is not gonna decide who makes or breaks the election, but if everybody thinks that way and no one shows up to vote, it will. I think played a role, most certainly when I was a political staffer, in some of the hatred and vitriol of the political discourse these days, and I'm really regretful for that. I think a turning point for me actually was when I was watching Michelle Obama's documentary on Netflix and just hearing how brokenhearted she was about the things that were being said about her, and how it affected her as a person and her family, and realizing when I worked on the Hill, I spent my everyday pitching negative stories about the Obamas, and so something that I'm committed to on this show is really making this about the policies, not the people, because it's interesting when you bring in the human aspect, sometimes it dehumanizes people more, and so I think
So
that is a
true.
good way to make it not personal is to not make it about the people. And something else that I am finding super helpful is turning off the TV. When I worked on the Hill, we had the cable news on 24/7, and it's really when I left DC and joined the real world and didn't have my TV on my desk all day long that I was able to see things from other people's perspective.
I totally agree. I couldn't agree more. And obviously, we're not going to always agree on everything because
Yeah,
that wouldn't be authentic, and it would
and
also
that's not
probably
the
be really
point.
boring. And
Yeah.
that's not the point. Exactly. That's not the point either. But I think what you said about contributing in some way really resonated with me. And I think it's time that we all step up, right? And it's not just about voting, it's about contributing however we can to elevate the dialogue, just participate in a way that models behavior that we all wish we want to see and
Mhm.
that we want our kids to see, quite frankly,
Yeah, exactly.
is so important. Because we've talked a lot about sort of how this kind of swirl, this toxic swirl, and the way that our politics is going really affects our children, and having to explain
Mhm.
so much vitriol and so much hatred and so much
Mhm.
violence is so difficult as a parent, but also that, we really worry for what that means for our kids, sort of being so impressionable and growing up in this time with all of this going on. And then also, I wanted to expound on what you said about not making it about the people and about the policies, because I think that's so important and so fundamental to what we want to talk about and what we hope to build, which is that, we're not about the personalities, right? I think that there's a reason why, and we could have a whole long discussion about sort of the reality TV politics world that we live in, where it has become so much about the personalities and these big personalities,
Mhm.
and it's not about the policies anymore. And I think fundamentally, you and I are both really wonky. We're pretty nerdy. We like to get in it with the policy and what that means. So when we say it's not about the people, I think we really mean it's not about the personalities. It is very much about the everyday people that these policies affect, right? The
Mhm.
350 million Americans, not the kind of the food fights that we see so often across cable news and the kind of tit for tat and the gotcha moments. That's
Yeah.
not what this will be about.
Yeah, and I think when you make it about people, I there was something that popped up on my news feed the other day, a psychologist that was talking about the reason why people get so upset when someone criticizes their politics is because to them, it's like you are criticizing them as a person. So if you call Donald Trump stupid, the people that voted for Donald Trump, you're basically calling them stupid and nobody's going to respond well to that. I also think it's really important to not make it about the people even in a positive way, not just criticizing people. I think we have seen in the Republican Party, unfortunately, there has been a shift from conservative values and it's because we are following a person instead of the policies and the principles that have guided our party for so long. That happens on both sides of the aisle. I think we've touched on a little bit, but I am kind of curious if someone was to say, "Why are you doing this?" What's one or two things that you really want to accomplish?
I think it's just really demonstrating that there's so much more than unites us than divides us. It's so cliche at this point, but it's something that I go back to a lot, particularly as parents, kind of, you know, younger women trying to navigate this crazy world.
I don't think
Um,
we're that young anymore.
I guess we're not.
I
In
know
my
we think we
head,
are.
I'm still in my head, I
I
still am,
know.
but you're right. I guess
Yeah.
we're officially middle aged now.
Yeah.
But as women, as parents, sort of trying to navigate this environment that, as you said, we fully take ownership of our contributions that sort of got us to this point, right? That perhaps there's some lessons we can share from. We can hopefully model some kind of discourse that maybe looks a little different from what we're seeing out there.
Mhm.
And I also think you and I have talked about this privately before, that there's something to this idea that people are viewing others through a political lens
Yeah.
first and foremost, and that's kind of dangerous, right?
Mhm.
Or at least it's gotten to the point where it's really dangerous, not even giving people a chance because we think that who they voted for says so much about them that
Mhm.
we can't possibly respect them as people. And e- I think it's kind of, in some ways, wildly ironic, maybe even inspiring, that you and I, who like lived and ate and slept and lived politics for so many years,
Mhm.
can say, well, maybe we need to be first and foremost viewing people through a different lens, through a people lens, right?
Yeah.
And trying to come to some understanding of who they are, and that who they voted for is not the whole story of who they are.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, this isn't even just about politics, so we can get along politically. Politics is not the most important thing, and I don't know, are you familiar with the
And it's a lot
Enneagram?
for us to say that.
Yeah.
It was all the things for both of us for many years.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Are you familiar with the Enneagram?
I've never taken the test. I did a Myers-Briggs personality
Yeah.
test
Yeah.
recently for the first time,
Okay.
and that was very illuminating. But
Okay.
I don't know what Enneagram I am. Do you know what you are?
I do. We can get into that later because I don't want people to have prejudice against me based off of my
Fair.
Enneagram. But, you just brought up the Myers Briggs. What's different about the Enneagram and why I love it is it's not about what you are, it's about why you are the way you are. And so
Mm.
that sounded like a lot. But I have found it so helpful. One, in my marriage, my husband and I, it turns out that ours are the two most explosive combos.
Oh, interesting.
So, he's a dreamer, I'm a realist, and, when he's dreaming and I come and rain on his parade, it's no good. But what I love about it is it explains why you are the way you are. It's super helpful in relationships to know that they don't wanna talk about this right now, not because they don't care or they're not escaping it. Their Enneagram personality is leading them to do this because of X, Y, and Z. So, I bring all that up because I think that's what one of my goals is for this. It's not just to hear what the Democratic position is on a matter. I wanna know why you believe the way you do and how you come to that conclusion. I had a kind of eye-opening experience. I was living in DC, and I was having a conversation with somebody who disagreed with me on abortion policy, and they challenged me. They said, "If you care so much about human life, why aren't you doing anything once these babies are born?" And again, I love a challenge. I got online, saw that there was a pregnancy help center on Capitol Hill, and it was this really beautiful organization that comes alongside women. But it was there that I actually understood for the first time why somebody might have a humane reason for having an abortion. So when I heard this very strong pro-life leader who is dedicated her life to encouraging women not to have an abortion is telling me some of these women are living on the streets and they don't have food and maybe they're being abused and they think, how in the world could I bring a baby into this world? That really opened my eyes. I think another goal for me in this is just to provide a sane medium for sane people.
Yes.
And
Amen.
we're a little crazy, so I don't know how sane it'll be, but one of the reasons why I don't watch the news and I turn off the radio so much is I can't stand to listen to either side. When I talk to people and I've floated this idea about having this show, I mean, maybe they're lying to me, but a lot of people said, yes, we need that.
Yeah.
I will say we better have at least 7 listens on this show because
At least.
at least because
Yeah.
that's
'Cause
who's
everyone
told me
says
they're
it's a good
listening.
idea,
Yeah.
but maybe
So
they're just not gonna tell us it's a terrible idea to wear
yeah.
faces.
Well, we'll find out if our
We'll
friends
find
are
out.
liars, really.
Mm, that's right.
Um, and then the last thing I'll say, and then we can move on, is I am so I wanna unite people because at the end of the day, it's not a Republican country and a Democratic country. Like, we are one America, and I know that sounds cheesy, and I'm not the first to say that, but when the other side loses, half of America is losing. I mean, I don't know about you, but I remember growing up in the 90s and watching the nightly news, and it was just 30 minutes of boom, 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 all these bad things are happening on the other side of the pond, right? It didn't really affect us. And this week, when I got another breaking news alert about the shooting at the ICE facility in Dallas, I just thought, "Oh my goodness, are other countries now watching our news and thinking, 'Gosh, I am so glad I don't live there.'"
Yeah,
So
I mean, they are. I think that's
yeah,
the reality, right? And that's
yeah,
and that's a really it's a sad day for us that
yeah,
I think so many people around the world look at us and say, "What is
yeah.
going on? What has happened?"
So, anyway, those are a few of my goals for a podcast.
Debbie, we're gonna start with something that, is not in the news at all, has not been the talk of the past, 5 years. We're gonna talk about vaccines. What I wanted to bring up today to sort of get your take on is the announcement coming out of Florida earlier this month that Florida is going to become or aims now to become the first state to repeal all vaccine mandates for school children. That was a headline from a couple weeks ago that then reverberated throughout the news cycle. I know I saw the Surgeon General of Florida on TV. He was asked in sort of this clip that at least was all over my news feed if the state had done any data modeling to get a sense of how many Floridians might be at risk with this policy change. Surgeon General Ladapo's answer was basically, no, we didn't. Who am I to tell you what to put in your child's body? This obviously has implications far beyond Florida. There are a number of states that are now eyeing this, seeing where it goes, and potentially looking to follow suit. And it's really a fascinating one to me because it gets to the heart of so many things that are so critical in this country, the intersection of privacy, of bodily autonomy, but also
Mhm,
the idea of how interconnected we are as a society. That's really what public health is about, right? How our decisions as individuals, the decisions that we make about our own health, how those decisions impact the population at large. Of course, anyone who's lived through the past 5 years knows that this is some really complicated stuff.
mhm.
And both from a science and from a messaging perspective, we could spend hours talking about what the Biden administration got wrong communicating about COVID. And there's a lot to dissect there and quite frankly, a lot to criticize. My first question is, Debbie, how do you personally respond to vaccine skepticism or outright hostility? Do you kind of steer clear from conversations on this topic with people who you know who disagree? Do you try to convince them? It's one of those that I know a lot of people are struggling with on both sides because it's so personal.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I was a little nervous and hesitant to address this when you first mentioned you want to talk about it because I am not a public health expert. But to your point, it does bring up a lot of questions. And so when I thought about it a little bit more, I thought, actually, I'm perfectly positioned to discuss this because I actually was not fully vaccinated as a child. My mother, I always say she was a hippie before it was cool to be. She was one of the first customers at Whole Foods when it was a tiny little shop in Austin, Texas. So, not for religious reasons, but she chose not to vaccinate us because she believes in holistic medicine. I didn't necessarily agree with that. I am now fully vaccinated, but in my family, it was kind of normal, and so it's not this mind-blowing like it probably is for you, like, what in the world? There are people that that think this is okay. But I would say it wasn't really much of a discussion in our family until COVID, and I think one of the most brilliant political moves Trump ever did early on was undermining the media's credibility because it doesn't matter what they say if you don't trust them. And I think similarly with the vaccine debate, people that are skeptical of the vaccines are skeptical of conventional medicine. And so bringing up a bunch of studies that says this is beneficial doesn't hold any weight because they don't trust doctors. So a study by a bunch of doctors isn't going to mean anything to them. So I really do try and steer clear of it. And I'll say I have evolved in that. I'm the youngest of four children. My full time hobby and sport growing up was getting under my family's skin and bringing up contentious issues. But again,
We
during
have that in
20,
common.
yeah. But during 2016, politics became really personal. And I have since decided that I value relationships with my family more than I do being right or having fun. I'm not hiding it. I was on my way to Texas. This was back when everyone was trying to find a vaccine and we weren't flying. So we would drive all the way from Alabama to Texas, 12 hours. And I was online looking up every CVS to see who had one. We ended up getting one in Mississippi on our drive there. And so I'll mention it, and it's kind of to show, look, I got it and I'm fine. But no, to answer your question, I do not engage in debate with people because I do respect their decision. They feel strongly about it. And so I try and respect that and where they're coming from.
So, a little personal tie in on my end too. I'm part of a medical family, and I definitely know my way around a hospital. And I know over the years, I've come to know many healthcare professionals with many opinions quite different from mine, of all political stripes, all conservative, liberal, everything in between. But the vast majority of them, I think I can honestly say every single one that I've ever encountered
Mhm.
has believed in the efficacy and the importance of these childhood vaccines, specifically setting aside, the COVID vaccine, um, which I think they all support too, but we're not talking about that right now. Um, and there's also a lot of polling data to support specifically, again, the childhood vaccines. 79% of Americans support mandating vaccines to attend school. Anybody who's had a sick kid knows how miserable it is, even with just a common cold
Mhm.
or the hand, foot, and mouth disease, which we somehow managed to avoid. So my question is, and again, this is now the focus on sort of the comms of it all.
Mhm.
Why do you think so many Republicans see this as a winning issue when the numbers don't point that way?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, to your point, it physicians overwhelmingly, whether they're Republican or Democrats, support vaccines. And it's been interesting to watch Capitol Hill the last few weeks because you're seeing these Republican senators like Bill Cassidy, Republican Louisiana senator, stand up and say,
And
whoa, whoa,
doctor,
whoa.
by the way. Oh, no, sorry,
Yes,
not Bill
doctor.
Cassidy. No, he is a doctor. He is a doctor.
Yes,
That's
he
right.
is a
Yeah.
doctor. Yes. And there's several that are standing up with him that are saying slow your roll. It's not a conservative or a liberal issue, but I do think backing up a little bit, this vaccine skepticism did gain a lot of footing during COVID, and I think to the point you made, there were a lot of missteps and a lot of miscommunication. And what we saw during that time is people started to mistrust what they always thought was a trustworthy agency. Just to put this into perspective a little bit, in 2020, a Pew Research poll was conducted, and it was right when COVID started. I think it was the last week of March. And the poll showed that overall 79% of Americans held a favorable opinion of the CDC.
Wow.
84% of those of right and right-leaning people had a favorable opinion and might say, oh, well, it was a Republican administration. Of course, they were trusting of it. But even during the Obama years, approval ratings among Republicans remained well above 60%. So um, overall, this has been an organization, an agency that people have trusted. Fast forward to August 2025, we are back to the same Republican administration as 2020. And today, only 40% of Republicans view the CDC with favor. We don't need a
It's
poll
pretty
to know
jarring.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is crazy that in 5 years, and I just point that out because I think what COVID did is it really undermined trust in the agencies. I think public trust started to erode when common sense went out the window. I mean, I think we were all fine and dandy to do whatever the government told us, but when they started telling us to do stuff that made absolutely no sense, I mean, some of the most absurd examples I can think about is when you walk into a restaurant, you have to wear a mask, but when you sit down and you're eating your food, you can take it off. And you don't need a science degree or a medical degree to know that doesn't make any sense. Or my
Yeah, I
favorite,
I remember seeing some behavior like that really made you scratch your head. Like, you'd
yeah,
see someone sit for an hour in a restaurant. New York City tables are super close together, right?
right, right,
And then they'd get up and they'd walk outside
correct.
into the street and put a mask on, and you
Yeah.
were like,
mask outside, on
Right,
hiking
right.
trails. And so
Right.
I
And
think
closing down parks and closing down green spaces. And they say hindsight is 2020. We can look back and say this probably was the wrong move. And, I don't think we want to get into a whole discussion of what was done right and wrong in the COVID era. But I think you bring up the really
right.
salient point that it really changed everything.
Yeah, and I think kinda tying it all together, that's when the Florida governor really made a name for himself because he was one of the
Yeah.
first governors to stand up and say, "This does not make any sense. They are making us do things like, are we really gonna trust these folks?" And I think what we've seen is people like it when people stand up to the big guy. That's why Trump is where he is. He stood up to the media.
Yeah.
People like it when they see someone standing up to the big tech companies. And so I think we now have a class of politicians who are trying to make a name for themselves by questioning conventional wisdom. So I think that's just my attempt to try and get into the heads of the Florida officials because, as you said, polls show that the majority of people support the vaccine mandate. And in fact, I think you said 79% of Americans, but what's interesting is it's even higher among Florida parents. So Florida
Hmm.
parents, 82% of them support the measles and polio vaccine. And so it's interesting that they are trying to repeal that, but I
So do
think
you think this is kind of just the sort of classic cynical political move of like, let's throw some red meat to our staunchest supporters, knowing that if all these people are just going to get vaccinated anyway, it's probably not going to affect anything. But this is sort
oh,
of a
that's
headline that
interesting.
Ron DeSantis can kind of ride out into, 2028 or beyond.
Yeah, I think they are definitely getting ahead of themselves, and I think it's a lot like liberals with the woke culture. I think they're playing so far to their base and it's gonna backfire. I mean, we'll see. I'm never a great predictor of what's gonna make good politics, but I do feel like it is bad policy, first and foremost, and here's why. Regardless of where you stand on vaccines, there is a legitimate question of whether or not this mandate repeal is a good idea. So, in the announcement, the Surgeon General called the vaccines a moral intrusion that hampers a parent's ability to make healthcare decisions. This is not a debate about the effectiveness of vaccines. To your point, they aren't conducting studies. This is about parents' rights, which as a conservative, I support. But Florida's regulations already allow for parents to file exemptions. They allow for medical and religious exemptions. And I wanted to
Right.
see for myself how burdensome is filing an exemption because when I
Oh,
was a kid,
interesting.
yeah, when I was a kid in Texas, I remember being so annoyed that every semester before I registered for classes, my mom had to submit a note to the registrar claiming my exemption. Now that I have kids, I know that it was way easier than actually taking my children to go get shots while they scream at me. And then the forms that you need from the health department to submit to the school, that actually took more work. And so in
Well,
Florida,
I
I
have to tell
decided,
you though, health forms are the reason why we have two kids and not more than
yeah,
two kids, because health forms are the bane of my existence. Like the different health forms for school, for every camp you send them to, for every
yeah.
program. Like I don't want to fill out more health forms. That's it.
Right.
I'm done.
Now so I
So
wanted to see though, what is it like in Florida? How difficult is this? And sure enough, you go to the health department, you complete a form and you submit it to the school. So it is again a little easier because your kids aren't screaming. I mean, I don't know about you, but my kids on a daily basis keep saying, "Oh, it's fall. That means we have to get flu shots." And I'm like, "Oh, thank you for reminding me." um but and according to Children's Health Defense Chapter, a health official cannot question an applicant on their reason for
Mhm.
submitting. So if there's ever
Right.
any concern about, well, are they going to conduct an interview? The answer is no.
So it really is as simple as filing a form, claiming
Yeah.
the exemption. Nobody can question it. And that is the current law, right?
Yeah.
In Florida. Yeah.
So I think playing devil's advocate, you might say, okay, if they can get exemptions, why do you care that there's no mandate at all? And I think the reason why is there's going to be a lot of people that aren't opposed to the vaccine, but the same way I keep every morning thinking, oh gosh, I need to schedule that flu shot. If that flu shot was mandatory by a certain date, it would have been done already. But because it's
Right.
optional, it falls to the bottom of my to do list.
It's all really fascinating, right? But Debbie, I'm so curious to know, as someone who worked on the Dobbs case, right, that famously overturned Roe v. Wade, what do you think of so many conservatives, or let's say people in the MAGA, in the Maha and the MAGA camp, kind of co-opting this "my body, my choice" phrase, which for decades has been associated with the pro-choice movement and reproductive rights. Like, how do you feel about that?
It 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 makes me wanna rip my hair out, to be honest. I take issue with this line of reasoning for the same reason I reject this premise in an abortion debate. When one
Mm.
forgoes a vaccine, it impacts more than just the decision maker. In this case, it impacts a child, just like an abortion impacts a child. Um Lower vaccination rates lead to lower effectiveness for everybody. If you do not vaccinate your child, it's not just your child that is going to be impacted by it. It impacts the herd immunity. This language comes, as you mentioned, straight from the pro choice playbook. And it's coming from the Surgeon General, and this is the same administration that has supported strong pro-life legislation. And so I think if I was their communications advisor, I would say this really opens you up to accusations of hypocrisy. You can't say on one hand, my body, my choice for vaccines, and then counter that when the pro-choice community tries to use it. I really hope that other people don't pick up this language because not only do I personally believe it's not true, but it lends credence to the other side's argument and it undermines our position whenever we're discussing abortion. As you can see, I don't feel strongly about this at all.
Yeah, and I would add too, I mean, I know this is my topic for you today, but I think just to wrap up, I would add one of my concerns, again, coming from a medical family, is this now puts doctors in the position of having to convince people why this
Mhm.
might be the right thing to do, rather than it just being mandated for school unless you qualify for an exemption or submit an
Yeah.
exemption. And my concern there is, doctors are already very crunched, right? The average patient visit is like 15, 20 minutes. I hate to see anything that puts particularly pediatricians and family medicine doctors in a position to erode the doctor patient trust, right? And so it's such a difficult line to walk for healthcare practitioners who then might have to say, well, you should really get this vaccine. And they're walking on eggshells and trying to understand, can I do this in a way that might yield the result that I hope for? But if I don't, then this person's going to leave and then they're not going to seek medical care when they need it. Right.
Mhm.
And so I
Yeah.
worry about that a lot too.
Okay, it's your turn now. When we first discussed doing this, we were going to focus on the most recent school shooting. And since we've decided to do this topic, there have been several more. Why don't you give us a high level overview of what has been going on?
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is something that, while not unique anymore in any way, shape, or form, it's something that has been part of the public consciousness in a way that our generation has grown up with, right?
Yeah.
With Columbine happening
Mhm.
when we were
Mhm.
young. And that sort of feeling like it was a turning point. And certainly I think now, looking back on history, it was a turning point.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, it wasn't a turning point, at least from where I sit, in terms of legislation um, on gun control. But I think that it was a turning point in terms of, as we started to see so many more school shootings and mass shootings crop up since then. And this just continues to happen over and over and over again. So what I want to focus on really is these incidents of mass violence, many of which have occurred in schools, some of which occur, in workplaces. We saw one at the ICE detention facility in Dallas earlier this week, which, I think there's probably can be a more fulsome discussion around whether that is an incident of domestic terrorism or not. And, I think that there's also a somewhat interesting case to be made that even school shootings arguably are acts of terrorism or acts of violence. They fit a lot of that sort of profile,
For
right? Of
sure.
looking to get attention, to terrorize, right? But what I really want to focus on is sort of specifically around school shootings, because we've seen so many of them. And I think what's really important to keep in mind here is that um, the motivation and sort of the around mass shooting demographics, and particularly in schools, that notably a lot of the individuals who engage in mass shootings are suicidal. And while it's hard to know how exactly mental health plays into that, right? In a lot of cases, there are signs beforehand. There are manifestos,
Mhm.
there are messages given, there are signs to family, etc. Right? I think that that's really important because so many people say, well, this isn't a gun problem, it's a mental health problem. And I think we need to acknowledge that both things can be true at the same time,
Yeah.
right? And I think we should also acknowledge that there is a pretty large and growing suicide problem among young people in this country, and particularly among young men, that is really scary, and that access to guns plays a huge part in that. And that so many suicides occur because of guns and access to guns. And there's a lot of research to show that they might not happen without access to guns. So I think those are all important things to keep in mind as we sort of look at this gun control debate and what that means, and what that means for people who are, really fervent Second Amendment rights believers and gun owners. And a lot of the debate around this has become is we're taking your guns away, we're taking your guns away, we're looking to take your guns away. And I think it's been really, really difficult to counter that idea with
Mhm.
any kind of effective messaging, even in the face of, upwards in some cases of 70, 80, 90% of Americans. And that includes Republicans, that includes gun owners, supporting certain common sense policies like safe storage, like red flag laws, like domestic abusers not being able to own guns, right?
Yeah, so I think when I first hear or I think a common thought is you hear, "Okay, you're gonna instill more regulations." How good will more regulations be if the weapon was obtained illegally? So tell me a little bit about what regulations you support that would make a difference in preventing some of these deaths.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, one thing that's really important to keep in mind, these are DOJ statistics. 77% of those who engage in mass shootings, I think this is since the 1970s, so close to 80% purchased their guns legally. At
Wow.
least, if they used multiple guns, they purchased at least one of their guns or some of their guns legally. So that's a pretty overwhelming
Mm,
percentage, right? And then when you look at K through 12 shootings, over 80% of those individuals stole guns from family members or obtained guns from family members. So to me, that points to tremendous room for effective safe storage laws,
mhm,
effective controls around um, gun locks that can come from manufacturers, and around safe storage in the home, and also around purchase constraints, whether it's
mhm,
age restrictions, whether it's background checks, whether it's waiting periods. These are all things that a number of gun owners support. And in a lot of this really specific cases, when you look at the polling, overwhelmingly support.
mhm.
And yet we have not been able to really make major headway nationally, though there have been some gains, at various state levels. And, it's something that I think we have really, when I say we on the left, have really kind of been at a disadvantage when it comes to the kind of the messaging fight on this one.
Yeah, I think gun control is one issue where people automatically retreat to their corners and tune out the other side. Where do you think we could do better?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult with these sort of cultural issues. When I say that, people toss around the idea of gun culture, but it is really true. Some people are, by virtue of where they're born, the families they're born into, they are born around guns and comfortable around guns. And a lot of people are just not, right? It's a big
Mm,
cultural divide, and it's something that I think we have a really hard time bridging. So, and I think a lot of it really boils down to density and just how different our country is between urban areas and rural areas where, it might be perfectly commonplace to own a gun to
mhm,
protect yourself against a bear or like
mhm,
being trampled by an elk. And of course that's sort of a very specific and almost kind of seemingly silly sounding use case, but obviously that's true. But I think it also really comes down to these sort of really personal beliefs around protection, around fear, around protecting one's family. And I think we'll probably later do a whole episode around, men and boys and the manosphere and all of that. But I think there are huge tie-ins here to what we're seeing with men kind of feeling really disempowered in 2025. And the way the world is changing. And I think that's why you see, I think it's like upwards of, I'll have to look up the statistic, but it's upwards of 80% of guns are owned by the same sort of smaller percentage of people. There's a tendency when people sort of start to really become enmeshed in this world of gun ownership to buy more and more and more guns. And there's sort of this tendency, I think, for a lot of people on the left to ask themselves, well, why? Like, what is the need? Maybe people can understand, maybe people like me can understand, if you want to own a gun safely to protect yourself, to protect your family, to protect your
Mhm.
property, et cetera. But, at what point does it sort of become overkill, right? Like, at what point are we saying enough is enough? And so that I think also plays into it. Is there's just sort of psychological aspect of more is more is more that I think a lot of people on the left don't understand. But to go back to your original question of, what is it that we're trying to do?
Yeah.
What is it that organizations like Moms Demand, like Giffords, are trying to do? So they look at sort of promoting all kinds of legislation around a lot of the things that I mentioned before. So, taking guns away from domestic abusers, responsible gun storage, knowing that when guns are in the home, that the adults are responsible for ensuring that they are put away safely. That loaded guns are not left around. That ammo is kept separately from a weapon, that red flag laws can exist to help protect people who might be in crisis, that they can't get hold of a gun. Again, that there can be waiting periods, that there can be limits on, age limits, just in the same sense that, you have to be at least 16 or 17 or 18, depending on where you live, to drive a car. So I think there's been a lot of comparisons that way that I think are pretty fair. At this point might seem kind of trite, but we have a DMV that highly regulates who and when can obtain a driver's license to drive a car, and you have to have insurance, and you have to
Mhm.
prove that you're capable of doing so safely. And when you have something as inherently dangerous as a gun, it seems to me that it would be logical to implement the same kind of protections.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of times where we go wrong is when you hear a topic like this, you think pro-gun, anti-gun,
Yeah,
and there's a lot of room in the middle, and I think moving into the communication aspect of this, I think one area it's gone really wrong is it's been made an issue kind of pitting faith against gun control. I mean, from my perspective, and I'm curious since this is your segment where you think things could do better, there isn't a world where it's don't pray and we need to take away guns.
totally.
I think where we've gone wrong is insulting a whole sect of people in the name of gun reform, and so that would be my advice
100%.
for the other side.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think too, when I think back to the most effective, consequential, important moments, legislative victories for the left over the past 60, 70, 80 years, every single one of them, from civil rights to winding down the Vietnam War to really the 60s through, the 90s, early 2000s, we only win on the left when we engage
Mhm,
with communities of faith.
mhm.
We can't win without them. I really believe that. And so I hear your point because I deeply, deeply understand the sort of knee jerk, well, thoughts and prayers aren't enough anymore. I get that,
Mm,
but we have to be so careful with our language because we cannot afford to alienate communities of faith.
yeah. And I wanted to talk about this one because it's something that I have felt a shift in my own perspective. Something really struck me with the last few shootings because a lot of times I would kind of revert back to what I had always heard, that
Hmm.
guns don't kill people, people kill people, or if they don't have respect for for life and the law, why would they respect more regulations? But I just thought, what if it was my child, and what if there was something that I could have done and I didn't
Yeah.
do something?
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
that
It's interesting to hear you
finality.
say that too, because I remember for me, I was not a parent yet when the Sandy Hook shooting happened, but I was working in politics at the time. I was working in the state of New York. And I just remember being so devastated when that happened and so just overcome with grief for what had happened.
Yeah.
And I remember watching whatever it was, nightly news or some kind of cable news that night, or local news that night. And there was a teacher on, and I remember this clear as day, that she said, I hid my students in the closet, and I said, you have to be as quiet as possible. And I just told them over and over again that I loved them, because I just thought, if this was going to be the end, I'm like getting emotional thinking about it, that I just wanted these kids to know that they were loved.
Mm.
And I think about that all the time, anytime there's a school shooting, because, you know, these are, somebody's babies, and we're putting these teachers who already have really hard jobs in this absolutely impossible position.
Yeah. Yeah. The other reason why I want to talk about it is because there is so much that we can agree upon and things that we can
Yes.
do. And it hasn't gotten done because it has been such a divisive conversation. And so I
Hmm.
wanted people to hear just how common sense some of these are. And if you want to go hunting on the weekends, which is the majority of the community I live in, no one's stopping
Yep.
you from doing that. This isn't about
Yep.
that. And I know there's a whole other topic I'm sure your mind is racing with is is your hunting worth the lives of children? But we don't even have to ask that question. There
Right.
are things that we can do to make things more secure and more safe. So I thank you so much for
Exactly.
sharing. Okay, so moving on to a lighter thing. So we won't always do this, but again, since we are nobodies and no one knows who we are, really, I want my friends to get to know you, because that's who's listening. Um, we want to do a lightning round. So she does not know what questions I'm going to ask. And if you ever watch Jimmy Fallon, he always does this at the end of his show with different guests. They don't know what's going to be asked. And it's not about answering with the right answer, it is about telling me the first thing that comes to your mind. And some of these are going to be kind
I'm
of random.
excited.
You're gonna think that this is a normal line of questioning, and then when I was reading them to my husband, he was like, "What?" And that's the
All
point.
right.
So
Can't wait for
let's
my turn
get
next week. What do you got?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, we're gonna start off normal, though. I am curious, if you could have dinner with one conservative politician, who would it be?
Ooh. Does it have to be an elected official, and do they have to be alive?
What's the first thing that came to your mind?
Well, I was going to say, like, could it be like a conservative thought leader? Because if so, then
Sure.
I would say Peggy Noonan, hands down.
Well, duh.
Yeah.
Easy. I am sad I didn't even think about that.
I mean, as a former speechwriter, she's
The
amazing.
best,
She's
yeah.
amazing. Yeah.
Okay, what is something that drives you crazy that doesn't seem to phase other people?
Ooh. That's a great one. Drives me crazy. Doesn't seem to phase other people. Um, oh, my worst pet peeve. I really, really hate it when people ride the subway with a ride a crowded subway with their backpacks on. I'm like, take off your backpack, put it on the ground.
Oh,
You're gonna whack someone in the face with that
oh,
thing. Drives me nuts.
interesting. I wouldn't wanna
Yeah.
put it on the ground. That seems gross to
Well,
me.
or hold it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like I've become an enforcer on
I
that.
would
I'm like,
drive you
take your break.
crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, is there a phrase that is often used in your world that drives you crazy?
Ugh, when people misuse literally all the time. All the time. Even my kids, my 7-year-old will sometimes be like, blah, 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 literally. And he's like, I used that correctly. And I'm like, yes, you did. Thank you.
This doesn't surprise me at all. Okay, I'm just wondering, do you put your bananas in a produce bag at the grocery store?
Oh, no, I do
No,
not.
okay. I
No.
traditionally have not, but I sometimes I
Do
do, and I
people
just
do
wonder,
that?
are we supposed to? I don't know, that's why I was asking you, it's good to know. So,
I don't, because you're
you
going to
don't.
peel it anyway.
Okay, that's good to know,
Yeah.
yeah. You are yelling at your kids to stop doing what?
Stop trying to commit fratricide. Stop trying to kill each other every day. Every day.
Every day. Yeah. Boy,
But
mom.
only around me. It's what makes me think that it's just an attention from mom thing.
Yeah, that's good. According to your kids, why are you the worst mom?
Ooh, if I overcook something, I am the worst
Mm,
mom.
okay.
They have very, very,
Oh,
like, very
they're
on
big
point taste buds,
foodies.
and if I avert my eyes from the grill and the steak is not medium rare,
Oh, they eat well,
worst
I'd get mad
mommy
at you for
ever.
that too. That's
I
been
mean,
known.
it's a fail, like, I'm mad at myself if I do
Yeah.
that, but,
I'm just
sometimes you
impressed
get
they eat steak.
distracted.
Okay, what are the least likely 3 words someone would use to describe you?
Quiet, unopinionated, um, and, um,
Boring.
uh, boring, sure, thank you, I'll take
Yeah,
it, that's a
yeah.
compliment, thanks.
Okay. What emoji best characterizes you on any given day?
That's a good one. I guess I could go with, what do I use the most or what
Mhm.
really characterizes me? I
Yeah.
feel like it's the face palm. It's like the
I love it. Well, that is all I have. We want this to be a conversation, not just with each other, but with our listeners. So if there is a topic you would like us to discuss, please send them our way. We definitely want to be covering the things that are interesting to you. And
absolutely.
we, of course, are asking you to share this with your friends, your family, your coworkers. And I think what is so great for this is, sometimes you hear something good and you think, oh, I can't share it because I might offend them or they might think that I'm, sending something their way with a hidden agenda. But we hope that there is truly something for everybody on this show. So,
There's no hidden agenda here. It's a very open agenda. We're very, we're very public about it.
yeah, exactly. I'm pretty sure no one's gonna listen to this. I don't
No
know
one's
if
gonna listen.
I
No
can
one's
listen to this, to be honest.
I hate the sound of my own voice, so I'm
Should we
definitely
just
not listening to it.
press publish and never listen to it again? Like, send that email and
I
don't
think
look
that's
back?
probably the right one.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right, sounds
Onward.
good.